Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going to be doing a deep dive into presidential power
Presidential power.
today,
Okay.
and specifically domestic affairs. We've got some excerpts here from Presidential Powers, Domestic Affairs, Part 1. And let me tell you, it's a lot more complicated than you might think.
Yeah, it's fascinating and
Yeah.
complicated. It's easy to think that a president can just,
Yeah.
kind of wave a magic wand and make things happen.
Yeah, like a king or a queen.
Right, exactly.
But where do those limits actually lie?
Well, one of the clearest lines is a 1952 Supreme Court case, Youngstown Sheet and Tube versus Sawyer.
Ooh, a legal case?
Yeah, a legal case.
Okay, so give me the rundown.
Okay, so picture this. We're in the Korean War.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big labor dispute in the steel industry.
Okay.
President Truman is worried about production stopping
Right.
and hurting the war effort.
Makes sense.
So he decides to seize control of the steel mills,
Okay.
thinking it's within his power as president.
Right, got to keep those weapons factories going.
You would think, right?
Yeah, what happened?
But Supreme Court said no.
Really?
Big fat no.
Wow.
They ruled that his actions were unconstitutional
Uh-huh.
because he didn't have the authority from Congress or the Constitution to just take over private property,
Oh, wow.
even during an emergency.
So even in, like, wartime,
Even in war,
there are limits.
there are limits.
It can't just be my way or the highway.
That's right. The court emphasized that the president's powers domestically are not unlimited.
Right?
They can't just act on their own,
Uh.
especially when it comes to things like private property.
So that commander-in-chief title doesn't just give them a free pass to do whatever they want.
It gives them huge power, but mainly for military matters.
Okay.
Domestically, it's really Congress who holds the purse strings,
Mm-hmm.
controls the money, and makes the laws.
Right.
You remember that faithfully executed clause we talked about?
Oh, yeah.
That's key here.
So the president has to follow the rules, not just make them up as they go along.
Right, think of it this way. Congress is like the architect,
Okay.
drawing up the blueprints for how the country should run.
Mm-hmm.
And the president's job is to be the contractor,
Huh?
making sure that those blueprints are followed.
Okay, I get that analogy, but then how do we know what a president can do?
What?
Like on the home front, it feels like there's got to be some wiggle room.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Enter Justice Robert Jackson
Okay.
and his brilliant framework for understanding presidential power.
Okay.
He basically said, look, it's not just black and white. There are different shades of authority.
Okay, shades of presidential power. So break it down for me.
Okay, think of it like a dimmer switch
Okay.
on a lamp.
Mm-hmm.
At the highest setting, you've got maximum presidential power.
Okay.
And this happens when the president and Congress are totally in sync,
Mm-hmm.
working together toward a common goal. So, for example, imagine Congress declares a state of emergency after a massive natural disaster.
Oh, okay.
That gives the president a lot more leeway to act swiftly
Right.
and decisively,
Yeah.
using funds and resources that Congress has already approved.
So they've both agreed to turn that lamp up to full brightness, give the president that power to really illuminate the problem
That's a great way to put it.
and get things done. But what about when things are a little dimmer, more ambiguous?
That's where we enter what Justice Jackson called the zone of twilight.
Ooh, a zone of twilight. I like it.
Yeah.
A little mysterious. So what is that?
This is where Congress hasn't explicitly said yes or no to a particular action.
Okay.
It's kind of that middle ground where things get murky.
Okay, give me an example.
Think about executive agreements with other countries.
Okay.
These are deals the president makes without going through the whole formal treaty process with the Senate.
Uh-huh.
They're not exactly forbidden by the Constitution, but they're not explicitly authorized either.
So it's like the president's trying to use a lamp with a faulty switch,
Right.
maybe getting some light, but it's flickering.
Yeah, it's uncertain.
Okay, uncertain. What about the lowest setting,
Okay.
where the president's power is weakest?
That's when the president acts directly against the will of Congress.
Okay.
It's like trying to use a lamp with a burnt-out bulb.
Yeah. No power.
Almost no power.
Right.
And likely to get shut down by the courts.
Okay, so I see the dimmer switch analogy here.
Yeah.
But even if Congress mostly holds the power, wouldn't a savvy president try to push those boundaries?
Absolutely.
Especially if they thought it was for the good of the country.
Of course.
Yeah.
There's always this push and pull,
Right.
between the branches of government.
Yeah.
A constant negotiation of power. And history plays a fascinating role in all of this.
Oh, right. You mentioned historical gloss earlier.
Yeah.
What was that about?
It's basically the idea that if presidents have been doing something for a long time
Mm-hmm.
and Congress hasn't put up a fuss, it kind of becomes an accepted practice,
Okay.
even if it's not written down anywhere.
So like an unwritten rule based on tradition?
Yeah.
Kind of like how everyone knows you don't talk about Fight Club,
Well,
even though no one ever actually said it?
maybe not that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
But you get the idea.
Yeah.
Think of it like a well-worn path through a field.
Uh-huh.
People keep using it, so eventually it becomes an accepted route,
Okay.
even if it's not an official road.
Yeah.
Executive orders are a great example of this.
Oh, right. Executive orders. Those are those directives.
Right.
That president's issue, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody has to wear silly hats on Tuesdays.
Not quite,
Okay.
but they do allow presidents to take certain actions
Uh-huh.
or direct federal agencies to do things
Okay.
without needing a new law from Congress.
Right.
And while they're not explicitly mentioned in the Constitution,
Okay.
they've become a widely accepted part of how presidents operate,
Right.
partly because of this historical gloss.
So tradition can actually shape how much power a president wields.
It can.
That's kind of wild.
Yeah.
But here's a real brain twister for you.
Okay.
What happens if a president really believes they need to do something,
Mm-hmm.
something big and maybe controversial,
Yeah.
but Congress is dead set against it?
Okay.
Like, they see it as a true national emergency,
Yeah.
but Congress is just not on board.
Right.
What are their options?
That's where things get really tricky.
Okay.
If we're using Justice Jackson's framework, that president would be operating at that lowest level of authority,
Mm-hmm.
acting against the will of Congress,
Right.
they'd be on shaky legal ground,
Okay.
vulnerable to challenges.
So are they just stuck? Like, game over?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
This is where that historical gloss we talked about can come into play again.
Uh-huh.
If there's a precedent for the kind of action they want to take,
Uh-huh.
even if Congress hasn't specifically approved it,
Right.
the president might argue that it falls into that murky zone of twilight.
So they could say, like, hey, look, other presidents have done this before, and no one made a big deal out of it.
Right.
Does that actually work?
It's a risky move, for sure.
Okay.
It all hinges on whether Congress has implicitly condoned similar actions in the past
Uh-huh.
by not challenging them.
Okay.
And of course, the courts could always step in and say, nope, not buying it.
Right. So it's a high-stakes gamble.
Yeah.
But what if the situation is totally new?
Right.
Something no president has ever faced before.
Right.
No handy historical precedent to fall back on.
Yeah.
Then what?
Then the president is in uncharted territory.
Okay.
They might try to make the case that the situation is so unique,
Right.
so urgent,
Yeah.
that they have to act even without clear congressional approval.
Okay.
They might argue that their inherent powers as president give them the authority
Mm-hmm.
to act in extreme circumstances.
Well, wouldn't that be a huge GE risk?
Absolutely.
Going against Congress that directly?
They'd almost certainly face immediate legal challenges.
Wow.
And the courts would have to decide whether the president's actions were justified.
Right.
It's a constitutional showdown
Yeah.
with potentially huge implications for the balance of power.
This is making my head spin.
Yeah, it's complicated stuff.
It is, but I guess that's why we're doing a deep dive
Exactly.
to really get into the nitty-gritty.
That's right.
But let's bring it back to our listener for a minute.
Okay,
Why should they care about all this legal back and forth?
good question.
How does it impact their life?
Well, it matters because these legal battles,
Mhm.
these power struggles, they're not just abstract concepts.
Right.
They have real-world consequences for all of us.
Okay.
The president's actions
Mhm.
or their inability to act
Yeah.
directly affect things like healthcare,
Right.
education, environmental protection,
Mm-hmm.
things that touch everyone's lives.
So understanding these limits on presidential power
Yeah.
helps us be more informed citizens.
Oh, that is.
We can hold our leaders accountable. Make sure they're not overstepping their bounds.
It's right.
Okay.
It's about knowing your rights,
Right.
understanding the system,
Mm-hmm.
and being an active participant in our democracy,
Yeah.
not just a passive observer.
That's empowering.
It is.
But it also makes you realize how much is at stake.
A lot is at stake.
Yeah.
And it all goes back to that crucial case we started with,
Yeah.
Youngstown Sheet and Tube.
Yeah.
It's a powerful reminder that even during a crisis,
Mm-hmm.
even when things seem chaotic,
Yeah.
the rule of law has to prevail.
Right.
The president isn't a king or a queen.
Yeah.
They're bound by the Constitution,
Right.
just like everyone else.
It's a case about steel mills, but it's really about something much bigger.
It is.
Something fundamental to how our country works.
It's a story about checks and balances,
Uh-huh.
about the tension between different branches of government,
Right.
and ultimately about the enduring strength of our constitutional system.
Yeah, and that brings us to another fascinating aspect of presidential power.
Yeah.
Okay, lay it on me. What's that fascinating aspect?
Well, we've talked a lot about the limits on what a president can do.
Right.
But let's flip the script for a minute.
Okay.
What about the tools they do have to get things done?
Okay.
How do they actually influence policy
Right.
and shape the direction of the country?
That's a good point. It's easy to get bogged down in all the legal stuff and forget that the
Yeah.
president isn't just sitting around waiting for Congress to tell him what to do.
Exactly.
Right.
They have their own ways of making things happen.
So what do they got? Like, what's in their toolbox?
Well, think of it like a toolbox. Congress might provide the blueprints, but the president has a whole set of tools they can use to build the house, so to speak.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So what tools are we talking about?
One of the most powerful tools is the power of persuasion.
The power of persuasion. That sounds kind of
I know it sounds a little
fluffy.
but it's actually incredibly potent.
Okay.
The president is, in many ways, the voice of the nation.
Yeah, huh?
They have this massive platform, this bully pulpit, as they say, to rally public support for their ideas.
Okay.
They could use speeches, interviews, social media, all sorts of channels to connect with people and build momentum for their agenda.
So they're trying to convince the public that their ideas are worth fighting for,
Yeah.
and then hoping that puts pressure on Congress to go along with it?
It's a bit more nuanced than that.
Okay.
It's not just about arm twisting or strong-arming Congress.
Right.
It's about framing the debate,
Uh-huh.
setting the agenda,
Okay.
and shaping public opinion.
Right.
If the president can effectively communicate their vision,
Mm-hmm.
explain why a particular policy is important,
Yeah.
and connect with people on an emotional level,
Right.
they can create a groundswell of support that's hard for Congress to ignore.
Yeah, like they're building a wave of public support.
Exactly.
And Congress has got to either ride that wave or risk getting wiped out.
Right.
Okay, but what about those times when Congress is just completely gridlocked,
Yeah.
totally unwilling to budge on an issue? Does the president have any other tools in that toolbox for
Yeah.
those situations?
And this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Remember those executive orders we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Those can be a powerful tool for a president to act unilaterally,
Right.
especially when they feel like Congress is dragging its feet.
Right. Those are like the presidential decrees. They
Right.
can just bypass Congress altogether and say, this is how it's going to be.
It's not quite that simple.
Okay.
Executive orders are still subject to legal challenges and judicial review.
Uh-huh.
And they can't be used to create new laws or violate existing ones.
Right.
But they can be used to direct federal agencies to prioritize certain policies,
Okay.
interpret laws in specific ways,
Uh-huh.
or even change how existing regulations are enforced.
So it's like they're using the existing rules in creative ways to push their agenda forward, even without getting new laws passed.
It's a delicate balancing act, though.
Right.
A president who relies too heavily on executive orders can be accused of overstepping their authority,
Right.
or even acting like a dictator.
Yeah.
But when used strategically and within the bounds of the law, executive orders can be a powerful tool for a president to make progress on issues that are important to them.
I see how it all fits together then.
Yeah.
It's not just about what the president can or can't do legally.
Right.
It's about understanding the whole toolkit they have at their disposal.
Exactly.
From the power of persuasion to executive orders to
Right.
working with or sometimes around Congress.
It's all part of a dynamic process.
Yeah.
This constant ebb and flow of power between the different branches of government,
Right.
it's messy, it's complex,
Yeah.
but it's also what makes our system of government so resilient.
It definitely keeps things interesting.
It does.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored the limits on presidential power, the role of Congress, the importance of historical precedent, and even the tools a president can use to influence policy.
We've seen how presidential power is both constrained and expansive.
Yeah.
how it's shaped by legal precedents, historical traditions, and even public opinion.
It's been a really eye-opening journey, and I have a feeling our listeners are leaving with a much deeper understanding
Powerful.
of how presidential power really works in domestic affairs.
Me too. And hopefully they're feeling a little more empowered to
Yeah.
engage in the ongoing conversation about the role of government in our lives.
Right, it's our government.
Exactly.
It's up to all of us to hold our leaders accountable and make sure that they're serving the best interests of the people.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into presidential power.
My pleasure.
We hope you've enjoyed the journey, and we encourage you to keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep learning.
Absolutely.
Until next time.